The Virelk warship Torvath drifted into the Sol system like a wounded beast barely clinging to life. Its hull was scorched, its once mighty weapons silenced, and its engines flickered weakly as the ship limped toward the third planet, a place the crew had never expected to visit, let alone beg for help. Commander Zarev stood on the bridge, his sharp, reptilian features darkened with frustration. This was a disgrace. The Virelk were warriors, conquerors, survivors of 1,000 battles, yet here they were, seeking aid from a species barely known in the wider galaxy. Humanity was an anomaly, a race that had emerged from its isolated planet only recently, and yet its reputation was strange. Not feared like the Exilary warlords, nor revered like the ancient core dominion. Humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and, above all, dangerously compassionate. That last trait made Zarev uneasy. Compassion had no place in war. It was a weakness that got soldiers killed. And yet, it was their only hope now. The distress signal had been sent hours ago, and there had been no response yet. The crew was growing restless, whispering doubts through the corridors. Many believed humanity would ignore them, or worse, take advantage of their weakness. The galaxy was unforgiving, and kindness often came at a price. Zarev had considered ordering the ship to drift further, to hide in the darkness of space until a Virelk fleet could rescue them. But deep down, he knew the truth. No one was coming. Their own allies had abandoned them, their high command had gone silent, and their enemies had left them crippled, assuming they would die on their own. They were alone. And so, the humans were their last chance. Then, without warning, the comms officer gasped. "Commander! We have an incoming transmission from Earth." Zarev turned sharply, his claws tightening against the metal rail. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing the image of a male, dressed in an unassuming uniform, his expression calm but unreadable. "This is Admiral Ryan of the United Earth Fleet. We received your distress call. You're in bad shape. Can you make it to our nearest repair station?" His tone was level, neither hostile nor overly welcoming. A test. Zarev recognized it immediately. The humans were cautious. Good. That made them predictable. "We can manage," Zarev replied carefully, hiding the true extent of their damage. "We require immediate repairs. Payment can be arranged." A brief silence followed, then Ryan spoke again, but his words were not what Zarev expected. "No payment necessary. Transmitting docking coordinates now. We'll take care of you." Zarev's blood ran cold. No demands? No negotiations? Just like that, they were offering help for free? It made no sense. Even the most generous of species demanded something in return: favors, information, allegiance. The Virel crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, his voice laced with suspicion. "It could be a trap." Zarev knew that was possible, but the alternative was worse. If they refused this offer, their ship would continue to deteriorate, and soon they wouldn't have the power to escape Sol's gravity well. They were already dying. If this was a trap, they had no strength left to fight it anyway. "We have no choice," Zarev muttered, then turned back to the screen. "Understood, Admiral. We are proceeding to the coordinates." The journey to the human station was tense. Every moment, Zarev expected hidden weapons to emerge from Earth's orbit, or for human warships to appear on their sensors, demanding surrender. But nothing happened. The station, Horizon Dock, was a massive orbital facility with sleek, efficient design far more advanced than Zarev had anticipated from such a young species. As they approached, human engineers transmitted schematics, guiding them into a repair bay without restrictions. No lockdown procedures. No armed boarding teams. Just trust. That word made Zarev's skin crawl. The docking clamps locked into place, and the station's automated systems immediately scanned their ship, displaying diagnostics and crisp, clear reports. Within moments, a message came through. "Commander Zarev," Ryan's voice returned, steady as ever. "Your ship's in worse shape than you admitted. Structural integrity is failing, and your core is unstable. We'll prioritize repairs." Zarev hesitated, feeling an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his mind. It wasn't fear, it was uncertainty. He had expected manipulation, deceit, some hidden agenda, but all he saw were humans working, moving quickly, wasting no time in stabilizing their dying vessel. They weren't demanding surrender, weren't placing restrictions on movement. They were just helping. The thought was almost disturbing. As the repairs began, Zarev and his officers watched closely, trying to decipher the humans' true intentions. But the more they observed, the more confused they became. Human engineers were efficient, innovative. They didn't just patch up damage, they improved systems, finding weak points that Varelk engineers had ignored for years. Shields were optimized, engines calibrated, even the ship's weapons technologies that humanity had never seen before were reinforced with human ingenuity. It was as if the humans enjoyed fixing things, as if their entire purpose was to restore what was broken. Zarev's second in command, a hardened veteran named Vorthok. "This is unnatural," he muttered. "Why would they help us without leverage?" Zarev didn't have an answer. In all his years of war, every alliance he had formed, every deal he had brokered, had come with a price. But here, in the orbit of an insignificant blue planet, humanity was rewriting the rules of survival. They didn't see weakness as something to exploit. They saw it as something to heal. And that, more than anything, terrified Zarev. But beneath that fear, another thought whispered in his mind, one he hadn't considered before. Perhaps humanity was not weak at all. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous. Something the galaxy had never seen before, and he was standing at the edge of it. Commander Zarev stood on the bridge of the Torvath, his claws gripping the metal railing as he observed the human engineers through the internal cameras. The repair station, Horizon Dock, was alive with movement. Hundreds of human technicians, clad in simple yet efficient uniforms, worked tirelessly on the warship's battered frame. Welding torches sparked, robotic arms shifted heavy plating into place, and diagnostic scanners whirred as they examined every inch of the vessel. It was an astonishing sight, humans working not as mercenaries, not as opportunists, but as problem solvers. They weren't just fixing what was broken, they were improving it. And that, more than anything, unsettled Zarev. He had expected repairs, yes. He had expected basic assistance, perhaps temporary patches to keep the ship operational. But this was something else. The human engineers had identified weaknesses in the Torvath that even Virok specialists had overlooked. They reinforced structural integrity, rerouted power systems to be more efficient, and even modified the shield matrix to function with less energy consumption while offering more protection. Zarev could barely comprehend it. How could a species with less advanced technology understand the flaws in a ship built by one of the most war-hardened empires in the galaxy? It was as if humanity had a gift, a natural instinct for fixing things, for adapting, for seeing problems in ways no other species did. The commander turned toward his second-in-command, Vorthok, who watched the work with narrowed eyes. "This isn't normal," Vorthok muttered, his voice low with suspicion. "They're not just repairing us. They're making us stronger." The words hung in the air like a silent accusation. Zarev knew what he meant. This level of assistance, this efficiency, came at a cost. No one helped without expecting something in return. The galaxy was cruel, filled with species that would sooner betray than support. What made humanity different? Why were they willing to do so much? For nothing? Zarev's sharp eyes shifted to the main viewport, where he could see the station's control tower. Admiral Ryan, the human officer who had authorized their rescue, was in there somewhere. The human's voice had been calm, unreadable. He had spoken with certainty, not hesitation. That alone made him dangerous. If he had some hidden plan, Zarev would uncover it. "Send a message to Admiral Ryan," Zarev said finally. "I want to speak with him. Now." His expression was neutral, his posture relaxed, but Zarev wasn't fooled. There was a sharpness in those human eyes, a quiet intelligence that hinted at layers beneath the surface. "Commander," Ryan greeted, "your ship is coming along well. My engineers are impressed by its design." The words felt like bait, a subtle invitation for Zarev to lower his guard. He wouldn't fall for it. Your engineers are effective, Zarev admitted carefully, choosing his words with precision. But I must ask, why go this far? You could have provided minimal repairs. Instead, you are enhancing our systems, reinforcing our defenses. What is it you truly want? Ryan didn't flinch. We don't want anything, Commander. Your crew was in distress. That's enough reason to help. The answer was unacceptable. No species operated like this. No species would waste valuable resources on outsiders without expecting something in return. Zara felt his frustration grow. No one in this galaxy helps without a reason, he said coldly. Altruism is a myth. Every action has a cost. Ryan exhaled softly, as if he had expected this response. Maybe in your part of the galaxy, he replied, but humanity has a different way of thinking. We help because we can. Because that's who we are. He paused, then added, You don't trust us. I get it. But let me ask you something. Commander, has anyone else come to help you? Have your own people sent reinforcements? Have your allies even acknowledged your distress call? Zarev's jaw tightened. He had no answer to that. The truth was a bitter thing to swallow. The Vorok had once believed themselves strong, an unshakable force in the cosmos. Yet, in their moment of weakness, the galaxy had abandoned them. Their so-called allies had remained silent. And now, the only species extending a hand was humanity. Ryan's gaze didn't waver. If we wanted something from you, Commander, we would have asked already. Instead, we're just doing what we do best, fixing what's broken. The transmission ended before Zarev could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He turned back toward the repair screens, watching as human engineers worked without hesitation. He saw them moving in perfect sync, solving problems at a rate that defied logic. And deep in his chest, an unfamiliar feeling stirred something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was curiosity. Hours passed, and the repairs continued at an impossible pace. The Torvath was transforming before his eyes. Human technicians optimized weapons output, adjusted power cores to increase energy efficiency, and even recalibrated the ship's hyperdrive to make faster jumps without overheating. Zarev's own engineers, once skeptical, now watched in silent awe. It was as if humanity could see the flaws in things at a level no other species could. It wasn't magic. It was a skill one honed through centuries of survival. Then came the most shocking discovery. One of the human engineers, a woman named Dr. Evans, requested a private meeting with Zarev and his lead technician. When they arrived, she showed them something that sent a cold shiver through the room, a fault in the ship's core. Not just damage from battle, but something deliberate. Hidden within the ship's internal systems was a sabotage mechanism, something placed before the battle, something designed to fail at the worst possible moment. Zarev's blood ran cold. This was done by our own people, he muttered. His hands clenched into fists. Our own high command. Dr. Evans nodded. It looks that way. Whoever did this wanted your ship to be vulnerable. Betrayal. The word burned in Zarev's mind. His own leaders had sentenced them to die. And yet, humans had uncovered the truth. Humans had saved them. For the first time in his life, Zarev felt something he never thought possible. Not fear. Not suspicion. Respect. As he stood in the dim light of the repair bay, watching humans work with relentless determination, he finally understood. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't naive. They were builders. They were fixers. They saw what was broken and made it stronger. And for the first time in history, the Vorok had received something far more valuable than repairs. Admiral Corval of the Exilarian Dominion sat in the observation chamber of his warship, the Sovereign Wrath, watching the human fleet in the distance. His scaled fingers tapped rhythmically against the metal table as he studied the enemy's formation. It was smaller than expected, lacking the sheer numbers and firepower of most galactic powers. By all logic, humanity should have been an easy opponent to crush weak, fragile beings with ships barely advanced enough to be considered a threat. And yet, something felt wrong. The Dominion had engaged human forces before, expecting a swift victory. Instead, every battle had turned into a disaster. Fleets that should have overpowered them were forced into retreat. Entire warships, superior in technology, were outmaneuvered and destroyed by vessels that had no right to stand against them. It wasn't just their weapons. It wasn't just their ships. It was something else. Korval turned toward his second-in-command, Commander Vresh, who stood stiffly at attention. "Explain this to me," Korval demanded, his deep voice laced with frustration. "Why does humanity continue to resist? Why do they fight as if they have nothing to lose?" Vresh hesitated before responding, his black eyes darting toward the tactical display. "Admiral, we have studied their battle tactics extensively. Their technology is inferior, but their strategy, it is unlike anything we have seen before. They adapt. They evolve mid-battle. They do not fight according to predictable patterns. Instead of retreating when outmatched, they change their approach entirely." He gestured to the display, where footage from past engagements were played. "Here, watch this moment. A human ship, outnumbered, should have fled. Instead, it sacrificed itself to cripple one of our dreadnoughts, changing the course of the fight. Their pilots make split-second decisions without hesitation, without fear." Korval narrowed his eyes, watching the footage closely. A single human cruiser, battered and burning, had positioned itself between two Dominion warships. Any other species would have prioritized survival, but the human captain had done something no Xelarian would have considered: ramming directly into the enemy's propulsion system. The resulting explosion had disabled the warship's engines, leaving it vulnerable. A desperate act, reckless and suicidal yet effective. This was not how war was supposed to be fought. "Are they insane?" Korval muttered. "No species should behave like this. No one throws their lives away so easily." Vresh shook his head. "That is their strength, Admiral. They do not see sacrifice the way we do. They see the battle beyond themselves. They see the war." He hesitated, then added, "And it is not just their combat tactics. Their endurance, their willpower, it defies reason." Korval's claws tightened around the armrest of his chair. He had read the reports. Humans endured injuries that would have killed other species. Their soldiers fought through pain, their pilots resisted exhaustion, and their engineers worked under conditions that would have driven others to madness. There were stories, unbelievable accounts of humans surviving conditions that should have ended them. One particular report came to mind. A Dominion strike team had ambushed a human outpost, wounding their commanding officer. The injury should have been fatal. A plasma bolt to the chest, a direct hit. By all medical standards, the human should have collapsed instantly. And yet, not only did the officer remain standing, he continued issuing orders, leading the counterattack, and driving the Dominion forces into retreat. He had died only after ensuring his people were safe. Korval exhaled slowly, suppressing the unease that crawled up his spine. "Where does this resilience come from?" he asked. "Their worlds are not harsher than ours. Their evolution should not have shaped them to be this way." So why he stopped? Because he already knew the answer. It wasn't about physical endurance. It wasn't about technology. It was something deeper, something woven into the very core of humanity itself. They were driven. Other species fought for survival, for conquest, for power. But humans fought for something more. For their families. For their ideals. For a future they refused to surrender. And that made them more dangerous than any empire, any armada, any weapon. Because even when they lost, they didn't break. Even when the odds were against them, they didn't stop. A warning alert sounded through the ship, interrupting his thoughts. "Admiral," Vresh said urgently, "the human fleet is advancing." Korval's gaze snapped back to the viewport. The small, insignificant-looking ships of humanity were closing in, their formation deceptively simple. There was no hesitation, no sign of fear. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew their chances were slim, and they didn't care. Korval clenched his jaw. He could already see how this battle would go. The Dominion would engage, expecting an easy victory. The humans would adjust. They would adapt. And somehow, some way, they would turn the battle in their favor. They always did. He had studied war his entire life, had conquered dozens of worlds, had crushed countless civilizations under the Dominion's rule. But now, for the first time, he was afraid. Not because humanity was stronger, not because their weapons were superior, but because they had something no other species had. Something unbreakable. Something unstoppable. The hidden strength of humanity. The air inside the war chamber was thick with tension. Admiral Vorn of the Greyloth Dominion stood before the massive holographic display, his piercing yellow eyes fixed on the planetary map before him. Earth. The last major resistance in this sector. His forces had crushed dozens of civilizations, their conquests swift and decisive. Yet here, against this seemingly insignificant species, they had encountered something different. Something unexpected. Humanity had defied all predictions, pushing back against an enemy they had no right to stand against. Their weapons were inferior. Their ships were outdated. Their numbers were small. But battle after battle, the Grelloth forces found themselves unable to break them. Every victory cost them too much. Every defeat was catastrophic. And now, the Dominion had reached its final option. A full-scale planetary invasion. Vorn turned to his second-in-command, Captain Zoth, who stood rigid at attention. "The fleet is in position," Zoth reported, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "The ground forces are ready for deployment. We expect full planetary control within 72 hours. Vorn remained silent, studying the tactical projections. He had heard similar reports before. He had been promised easy victories before. And yet, humanity had survived them all. 72 hours, Vorn muttered. That is what we estimated on Yalith Prime, and yet that battle lasted weeks. It is what we estimated at Corin VI, and yet we were driven off the planet. His gaze darkened as he faced Zoth. "Tell me, Captain, what makes this time any different?" Zoth hesitated. "We have overwhelming force. The humans are outmatched." Vorn let out a dry chuckle. "So they were before." He gestured toward the display, highlighting past engagements. "They were outmatched when they turned their capital ships into battering rams against our dreadnoughts. They were outmatched when they sacrificed entire divisions just to ensure a handful of civilians escape. They were outmatched every time we believed we had them cornered, and yet here we stand, still fighting them." He turned away from the display, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Captain, what happens when a species that refuses to surrender is backed into a corner?" Zoth swallowed, his reptilian throat shifting slightly. He had no answer. A sudden alert blared through the chamber. "Admiral!" A technician at the console spoke urgently. "We're detecting enemy movement, but not from Earth. There's an incoming fleet, approaching from the far side of the system. Hundreds of ships." Vorn's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. Our intelligence reported that the humans had no reinforcements." "We thought the same at the Battle of Arcadia," Zoth muttered under his breath. Vorn ignored the comment and focused on the data streaming across the screen. Something was wrong. The human fleet was moving too fast, breaking standard formation, not behaving like an ordinary defensive force. It was almost as if they're not defending Earth, Vorn realized, his voice barely above a whisper. His claws curled into a fist. "They're attacking us!" The war chamber fell silent for a long moment as the implications sank in. For weeks, they had assumed that the humans were preparing for their final stand, bracing for the inevitable defeat that would come when the Dominion forces landed on their world. But this was something else entirely. The humans weren't waiting for the battle to come to them. They were bringing the battle to the Dominion. "How many ships?" Vorn asked, his voice now calm, controlled. 316, Admiral, the technician answered. "Mostly outdated cruisers and frigates, but they are advancing directly toward us." Zoth exhaled sharply. "They don't stand a chance against our fleet." "No," Vorn agreed. "But that has never stopped them before." He straightened his posture and turned toward the command console. "Order all ships to defensive positions. If they want to fight, then we will oblige them." The bridge erupted into movement as officers relayed commands, activating defense protocols, adjusting battle formations. Vorn watched the human fleet draw closer, his mind racing through possibilities. What was their plan? Humanity never engaged without a strategy. Every battle they had fought was calculated, precise, designed to make the Dominion pay dearly for every inch of ground they took. Then, without warning, the human fleet split apart. Vorn's eyes widened as their ships broke formation, weaving between the Dominion's ranks instead of directly engaging them. It was reckless. It was chaotic. And it was working. Dominion warships, trained to fight in structured, predictable engagements, struggled to keep up with the erratic movements. They were too fast, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Then came the second shock. From the surface of Earth, Vorn's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. "This isn't an attack," he murmured. "This is a diversion." The human fleet had never come to win this battle. They had come to buy time, to keep the Dominion distracted long enough for their people to escape. They knew they couldn't hold Earth forever. They had accepted that. But instead of surrendering, instead of waiting for the inevitable, they had chosen to fight on their own terms. And now, no matter how this battle ended, humanity would survive. Vorn felt something cold settle in his chest. He had spent years conquering worlds, breaking civilizations, proving the Dominion's superiority across the galaxy. But for the first time, he was forced to acknowledge a terrible truth. They had underestimated humanity. Again. On the battlefield, their forces fought with everything they had, refusing to retreat, refusing to let fear dictate their actions. They were outgunned, outnumbered, outmatched in every way that should have mattered. But the true test of a species wasn't in how many battleships they commanded. It wasn't in how advanced their weapons were. It was in their will to fight. And humanity had already passed that test. Even as the Dominion crushed their cities, even as their homeworld burned, even as they lost battle after battle, they refused to break. Their strength wasn't in their ships or their armies. Their strength was in their unyielding defiance. Vorn exhaled, gripping the console as another human ship detonated in a blaze of light, taking yet another Dominion vessel with it. He watched as thousands of escape ships slipped past the battle, disappearing into deep space. They were saving their future. They were ensuring that no matter what happened here, humanity would endure. The battle was still ongoing, but Vorn already knew the truth. The war had only just begun. The Zulkir trade fleet never expected trouble. They were not warriors. They had never fought a battle, never engaged in conflict, never fired a single weapon outside of a routine calibration test. Their people, the Zulkir, were explorers, merchants, and diplomats, known across the galaxy for their vast trading networks. They preferred peaceful negotiations, clever deals, and diplomatic arrangements over war. But now, for the first time in centuries, their fleet was on the verge of destruction. And it was all because of one terrible mistake. They had underestimated humanity. It had started as a simple mission. The Zulkir vessel, Voshra, a massive cargo hauler with thousands of trade goods, had suffered catastrophic engine failure near the outer edge of the Sol system. Standard protocol was clear: request emergency assistance from the nearest neutral planet. And Earth, a relatively new player in galactic politics, had seemed like the perfect choice. The Zulkir had studied humanity from a distance, and their records described them as an ambitious but inexperienced species still struggling to find their place among the stars. They were technologically inferior, lacking the advanced shipbuilding capabilities of the core worlds, and their military was a fraction of what real empires possessed. The Zulkir had assumed they could trade for repairs, offering simple resources or minor technological insights in exchange for assistance. They expected a routine exchange. What they got, instead, was something else entirely. When the humans received the distress call, they did not hesitate. Within hours, a fleet of repair ships was dispatched from Luna Station, Earth's primary orbital dock. But instead of merely sending engineers, the humans sent warships as escorts, a clear overreaction, as if they feared an attack. At first, the Zulkir believed this was a sign of human paranoia, a primitive species still unaccustomed to interstellar diplomacy. But when the humans arrived, they worked with efficiency that was almost unnatural. The damaged engines were disassembled and examined within minutes. Human engineers, despite their crude tools and seemingly outdated technology, worked at speeds that defied all logic. Within 4 hours, the ship's main drive was repaired, something that should have taken days, even for Zelkir technicians. The humans worked tirelessly, without rest, refusing to accept anything in return. Captain Vosk, the Zelkir commander, was unnerved. This level of selflessness was unheard of in galactic trade. No species ever helped without demanding compensation. Even the so-called peaceful races of the core worlds always found ways to profit. But humanity? Humanity acted as if this was normal, as if helping strangers was expected. That was when Vosk made his second mistake. He decided to test them. The Zulkir were skilled negotiators, experts at manipulation. They always got the better deal. So Vosk approached the human captain, a grizzled officer named Reyes, and made an offer, a new trade route exclusive to humanity, granting them access to Zelkir markets in exchange for a small loan of military assets. Just a few ships. Just a few weapons. Something minor. Reyes had simply smiled. "No deal," he had said. "We don't trade favors for doing the right thing." Vosk was stunned. No deal? No species had ever turned down such an offer. The humans had nothing to gain by rejecting it. And yet, they had refused because it was the right thing to do? The concept was absurd. But then came the third mistake, the one that changed everything. As the Voshera prepared to leave, sensors detected an incoming fleet pirates, a ruthless warband from the Outer Rim, notorious for raiding stranded ships. Normally, this would not have been a problem. The Zulkir could easily bribe their way out of trouble, offering valuable cargo in exchange for safe passage. But this time, the pirates didn't want trade, they wanted blood. The humans saw the approaching threat before the Zulkir even had time to react. And before Vosk could utter a single word, the human warships moved into position. It was an act of insanity. The humans had no reason to fight. They were outnumbered, outgunned, facing ships that had plundered entire colonies. The smart move would have been to retreat, to let the Zulkir handle the situation as they always did by paying off their attackers. But humanity did not retreat. The first shots came from the pirates, a warning barrage meant to force compliance. The Zulkir had seen this tactic before. It was meant to intimidate, to make the target submit before real damage was done. But then, before the pirates could issue their demands, the human warships opened fire. It was unlike anything Vosk had ever seen. The humans fought like demons, their outdated ships moving with impossible precision. They didn't rely on superior technology. They relied on tactics, on instinct, on sheer brutality. Where other species would have calculated risk, the humans took action. Their ships darted through enemy formations, exploiting every weakness, adapting with terrifying speed. The Zulkir crew watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. Human ships rammed enemy vessels at full speed, their crews willing to sacrifice themselves if it meant protecting their allies. They used outdated railguns, but every shot hit with precision, tearing through pirate hulls like they were made of paper. They should have lost. They should have been wiped out. But instead, the pirate fleet, one of the most feared in the sector, was being annihilated. Vosk felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of the pirates. Fear of the humans. These were not the naive, inexperienced diplomats he had read about. These were warriors. And worst of all, they fought not for profit, not for gain, but because it was simply in their nature to protect those in need. The battle ended in less than an hour. The pirates were gone, their ships either destroyed or retreating into deep space. Not a single Zulkir vessel had been touched. The human fleet, battered and bruised, had taken losses, but their ships remained ready for more. As Captain Rise returned to the Voshera, his uniform torn, his face smeared with battle grime, Vosk could barely meet his gaze. He had misjudged them. He had assumed humanity was weak, that they were nothing more than opportunistic traders looking for a foothold in galactic affairs. But now he saw the truth. They were more than anyone had ever expected. Vosk swallowed hard. You saved us, he said, the words foreign on his tongue. We owe you. Reyes shook his head. No, you don't. You just do the same for someone else when the time comes. With that, the human captain turned and walked away. No demand for compensation. No request for payment. Just an unspoken promise that if the Zelkir ever needed them again, humanity would be there. And as the Voshra departed Earth's orbit, Vosk realized one undeniable truth: humanity was far more dangerous than the galaxy had ever imagined.